the financial independence, the phase that you have of that in retirement, it's all about freedom. It's freedom from work. And, for years, for decades, you have worked in order to have a paycheck. You've worked for your money. But you get to a point, the objective is to get to a point where your money is working for you. And so you have the time to be able to utilize it however you want. And my goodness, how liberating that is.
Yeah, it's absolutely exciting to think about. And I don't think it always is for people, because a lot of people, when they hear what we just said, they may think that's not going to be me, right? I don't know that I'm ever going to be there. But I'm telling you, no matter what age you are right now, and you're hearing us talk about this, you can make some changes, you can take some action, and hopefully, honestly, the questions and answers that we provide on this show will help stimulate that.
And I would also say, regardless of where you come from financially, like what type of family you grew up in financially, maybe it was good and you want to continue that. That's great that you have that legacy. Go for it. Maybe it was not so good and it's time for you to break the chains. And one of the key things that I think helps people do that is education. So that's one of the things we're going to do today, Scott, is just educate people about, from their questions and their perspective, what's going on in their world, how can they move toward their own definition of true financial independence.
And I think about it too from our perspective in this industry. It's not something that is a term that is used very much.
It's not.
You think about financial advisors, and I think about them throwing around terms like standard deviation and Sharpe ratio, right? The stuff
Alpha,
that nobody knows anything about.
Right.
True financial independence is our mission for our clients, and that is why we plan first and create an investment strategy centered around that plan.
And, all the details that you just referenced the rest of the industry talking about, those things have to be done.
Yep.
But it's really important to look at what are we solving for.
Right.
And what we're solving for is your financial independence.
Where are we going? Where is the destination?
Yeah.
Where's the end of that GPS taking us? And we believe it's true financial independence for each and everybody listening today. So let's dive into our questions. First up, it's Angie from Jonesboro, and she writes, I'm 48 and changed jobs recently. My old employer offered a pension, but I'm not sure whether to take the lump sum or the monthly benefit. How do I compare those options, apples to apples? Angie thinks we're going to get to the apples to apples. So you had an old job, you left behind a pension, and now it's decision time. Take the lump sum or the guaranteed monthly income. What looks safer might not be smarter. So as we walk through this, first of all, it's important to say for everyone listening and hopefully get some clarity for Angie here, if you have left your employer, your pension is essentially frozen, meaning the monthly benefit's not going to get any bigger, and the lump sum is probably not likely to grow either because you and or your employer will no longer be contributing to it. So that's a big piece to this decision. You're not talking about probably turning on a benefit at 48. You're talking about, do I take a lump sum and let it grow, or do I wait for some future point, whether it's 60, 65, whatever your company says is full retirement age, to take that monthly benefit? Now, the decision over whether to take the lump sum should be met with some clarity, too, depending on how she takes the lump sum, Jen.
Absolutely, and the timing of it, because, and that's another thing we don't really know from Angie, is the timeline at which she has to make this decision. And that's different with different employers. Sometimes you have to make it at the time that you resign. Obviously, she's been gone from the sound of her question. She's gone from that job already, so she didn't have to make it immediately, but sometimes you can't make it before like age 55, just as an example. So she may be able to do this now, or it might be later, and that plays into how you want to attack this decision, really. So in going back to what you were talking about, Scott, with the lump sum, Angie, if you have the ability right now to take this as a lump sum, then because you are not age 59 and a half yet, then if you just cash this out and don't roll it into an IRA, both of which would be a lump sum, but there's lump sum cashing it out or lump sum rolling it to an IRA. If you take it and just cash it out, then you've got taxes to pay on that, and you're going to lose a significant portion of your lump sum just to pay taxes. But on top of that, because you're not 59 and a half yet, you would have an additional penalty of another 10% for that early withdrawal withdrawal from retirement assets. So that is not one that we would recommend, but it is one that you need to understand that technically it is on your list of choices. But then you have the ability to also to take that lump sum and to roll it to an IRA. So let's get down to looking at, Scott, the IRA compared to the monthly benefits. And by the way, Angie, one of the things on the monthly benefit, if you mess around and just don't make a decision, and this is for everybody else out there who might have a pension decision, if you just don't make a decision, for most companies, the default decision is going to be a life-only payout for you with no benefit for a spouse. So there's no survivor pension income and no lump sum benefit. So if you get, let's say, one check and then you die in a car accident, that's done. That is all there is to that pension that you've worked, quite some time to accumulate.
Yeah, so if you look at the benefits of taking the lump sum, and again, in a pre-tax rollover to an IRA, you could then invest the funds any way that you like or working with an advisor, what's appropriate for you. And since you're 48, you still have a lot of time for that lump sum to grow. So if you applied the rule of 72, which we've talked about on this show too, which basically means you select your assumed rate of return. So if we say 8% and divide 72 by 8, we're going to get 9. And that answer is the number of years it would take for that lump sum to double. So in the next 18 years, you could see 2 doublings, which would make you 66 years old. So if you got $100,000, it could double to 2 and then double to 4. So that could make a significant difference in your retirement to have that. And really the reason you would want to do that is you have more flexibility, Janet, than the monthly payment.
Absolutely. And with you being 48 years of age, you have a longer time horizon between now and retirement than, obviously if we wait longer to make this happen. So in having the longer time horizon, you have an opportunity to focus more towards growth-oriented investments. So, Scott, in the scenario that you just walked through with an 8% return, we wouldn't want you to assume anything higher than that. But if you were able to get something higher than that, then that doubling period is going to shorten. So as an example, if you get 10% as an average, it's going to double every 7.2 years instead of the 8% doubling every 9 years. So again, we're not talking about any specific investment, but because you are not even in your 50s yet, you have the opportunity to be more growth-minded. But I would also say to balance that for sure.
Yeah, no question about that. And then you would have potentially some legacy benefit there too, because you would have value, an account value that could be passed on as opposed to that monthly benefit maybe stopping. Now, the guaranteed income component of the monthly benefit certainly makes it an attractive option too, because you will need guaranteed income in retirement to meet monthly expenses. And if Social Security is not going to be enough, which may be a hard determining fact right now when you're 48 years old, additional guaranteed income could help fill your gap. But when it comes down to kind of wrap up the answer here, she asked for an apples to apples comparison here. There is one way to kind of get a broad look at that. You'll likely need to be a certain age before you can receive the pension as a monthly benefit, as we have referred to. If you take our rule of 72 example, if the pension lump sum is $50,000, then it could be $200,000 by the time you're age 66. So if you looked at that and then compared if your future monthly benefit at age 66 is more than 5% of $200,000, well, it might make sense to take the monthly amount. If it's less, it might make sense to roll over the lump sum. Now, I don't think that's a decision that should be your only determiner in the decision, as we've already pointed out, but that is a way to look at the future value of the lump sum and say, could I take out, and we'll use 5% as kind of a general withdrawal amount, because you could put that into an annuity and likely get at least that. And actually, with today's interest rates, you might get a little more than that at 66. But that's a good way to get a comparison.
One of the things, I don't think that I have any concern about Angie doing this based on the tone of her question, but for somebody else out there listening who might be in a similar situation, let's go again with the assumption that this is $50,000 in this pension. It would be pretty easy for a person to look at the pension and go, it's not a whole lot. It's a good little sum, but it's not a massive amount. It's not going to really make a difference for me in retirement. And by the way, I need a new car.
Yeah.
So here's the deal, though. That $50,000 on the surface, you think, okay, I can replace my vehicle. But then you're going to go through the taxes and the penalties, and you're going to come out with more like $25,000, which is now no longer a new vehicle price. It's a used vehicle price.
That's hard to say.
And yeah, it is. That's a lot for us to swallow these days. But now that money is gone. You've bought a depreciating asset with what was to be your retirement assets, as opposed to that $50,000. Even at just that amount, if you have the two doubling periods, like Scott mentioned earlier, that's not $50,000 of retirement assets. It's $200,000 of retirement assets, and it will make a difference for you in the future.
Well, and Angie's talking about leaving her employer, but we do know, and because we have worked with lots of clients that are still at their current employer, and they have frozen their pension because they're trying to get out of it. Private pensions are going away. If you work for a private company, you're likely not going to see that. Very few of them continue to have them. So those are decisions that we know a lot of people watching and listening will have to make, and we would encourage you to reach out to a financial advisor. We'd be glad to help walk through those decisions with you. But the decisions, whether to take a lump sum or a monthly benefit, need to be made within the context of an overall plan. We want to remind you to subscribe to our YouTube channel for exclusive content you can't find anywhere else to help you discover, protect, and share true financial independence. You can find us by searching for GenWealth Financial Advisors on YouTube. Our next question is from Alicia via email. I'm 62 and widowed. I qualify for survivor benefits, but I'm still working part-time. How do I know whether to take my own Social Security, the survivor benefit, or wait altogether? Key decision there for Alicia. She's 62, widowed, and still working part-time. That's a big piece to this. We'll get to it. Should she claim survivor benefits now, later, or wait on both? Timing this could change everything. So for the audience, a widow or widower may qualify for survivor Social Security benefits if they are age 60 or older, which Alicia is, or 50 to 59 with a disability. They were married for at least 9 months before the spouse's death, did not remarry before age 60 or 50 if you have a disability. Ex-spouses may also qualify if married for at least 10 years. You may also receive a benefit sooner if you're caring for minor children. If you take it before your full retirement age, the benefit is reduced. So for Alicia here at age 62, she qualifies. She says so, and she's over 60. So the survivor benefit would be about 77% of the full benefit. So a little bit for the audience, a little bit for Alicia. She probably knew most of that already if she knows she qualifies. But there are other things to consider, and we want to circle now back, Janet, to the working part, because she says she's working part-time.
Yeah, so there are some earnings limits that you really have to pay attention to in this scenario. So since you're working, you're going to need to really pay attention to the math on this and know ahead of time whether this is a good call for you. If you earn more than, in 2025, $23,400, that does change every year. So if somebody's listening to this on a podcast at another time, this is the 2025 number. If you earn more than $23,400 and you have not reached your full retirement age, then Social Security is going to deduct $1 from your benefit for every $2 that you earn above that limit. So basically, you don't want to claim it if you earn more than that $23,400 amount. So that includes survivor benefits. So really, it is very important for you to do the math on this. And the other thing, Scott, that we haven't really talked about is to do the comparison of, yes, you do qualify for survivor benefits, but is that what you need to take? Because you're also continuing to work, and I'm going to make a little bit of an assumption, and I may be off on this, but for this generation, it is often true that people in Alicia's age group, that females took time off from work in order to raise family, to have children, and so I don't know how many zeros you have averaged into your calculation on Social Security, so it might ultimately still be in your best interest to claim the survivor benefit rather than your own. But I also know that you're continuing to work, and even though it's part-time, those part-time numbers are replacing some of those zeros early on that you might have had years ago. So it is important to look at what's the ultimate math. And if you don't need to take it right now, regardless of which one you do, whether you take your benefit or the survivor benefit, we would really encourage in most cases for you to kick that down the road a little bit and get a larger benefit in the future and lock that in.
Yeah, and I think the best way forward here for Alicia is to find an advisor that will build a retirement income plan that incorporates Social Security, whatever decision you may need to make with regard to Social Security, your work income, because we don't even know, as we've already talked about, how much she's making, other income that you may have, in income from your investments. We don't know if she has any of those or if she has lots of those, because we don't have all of the data here to make a decision. And I think that's the big piece for a lot of people, Janet, when you apply this to everybody listening, they're always wanting to know what's the best Social Security decision, as if there is a one-size-fits-all decision here.
Yeah.
And they get that advice around the water cooler from coworkers. I'm going to take mine at 62 because I don't know how long it's going to last, or I'm going to wait till 70 because it's going to be bigger and I'm going to live a long life. That's not where you should seek the answers.
You know what we call that here at GenWealth is Waffle House wisdom.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you go down to the Waffle House and sit around, and if you listen long enough, you're going to hear a Social Security conversation. And, you know, the four guys in that booth all have it figured out, whatever their answer is. And it's usually, you better take it to 62 because it ain't going to be there after that. And you know, so far I've been watching, and they hadn't been right yet. It's still there,
right.
You know.
That's right. It's going to be there. Now, what it looks like, we don't know, but it's going to be there.
And I think it's important for people to understand that changing Social Security does not mean ending it. It has changed before. It's changed many times before. It used to be, Scott, that the full retirement age for everybody was age 65. Mm-hmm. That continues to change, and if they adjust it again, that's fine. When I had my children, when the doctor handed me each of my children, he said to me, this child, barring an accident, it is highly probable that this child will live to be 100 years of age. If that becomes the norm, then it's okay to bump out the full retirement age on Social Security, and doing that gives us a breather on, you know, the drain on the money in the funds.
We have a young advisor that we work with here in the Little Rock office. He's he's 20, I think he's 24, maybe close to 25 years old.
You and I are getting a little bit older,
yeah,
Scott.
he's the age of my children.
Yes,
I'm going to go ahead and say that. But I often say in a client meeting room that, you know, when they change Social Security, I believe that they're not going to change it for current benefit recipients. I don't think they're going to change it for even me. I'm 52 years old, but Brandon's going to have to work till 75 probably before he can get a benefit.
Yeah. You know what, though? The good thing is about Brandon is he's on his track to discover, protect, and share his own true financial independence.
Very true.
He's not going to have to wait until 75 to retire because he needs Social Security. He'll be able to retire when he wants to because he'll be financially independent absent the Social Security check.
You bring it all back to our original statement: discovering, protecting, and sharing true financial independence, not counting on Social Security. But the point for Alicia and everybody else listening when it comes to decisions around it, don't make a Social Security decision in a vacuum, but make it as part of your overall plan with a financial advisor. Alicia, your question is the question of the week. We're going to send you a free Get Ready for the Future Show tumbler. We just need to know where to send it. To claim it, send us an email, show@getreadyforthefuture.com. And for everybody else listening or watching, if you want one of those tumblers, or if you just want to ask a question because you need an answer to it, you can text or leave a voicemail to 501-381-5228. Again, 501-381-5228. Any financial question or topic that is on your mind, get that into us. You can also send an email to show@getreadyforthefuture.com with your question. Next up, it's Jenny from Valonia. My husband wants to move to a no income tax state when we retire in 3 years. Would that actually save us money, or are there hidden costs we're not thinking about? No state income tax sounds great, but is the move really worth it? Now, there's more to this than meets the brochure. And I'm going to be honest, when I got to looking into this question, I went down a rabbit hole because you cannot just say, hey, if I go somewhere where they don't have state income tax, I'm going to have more income in retirement. Now, we do have a few clients who live in states like Texas where there's no state income tax. And it certainly means they get more bang for their buck when they take a distribution from their IRA. I can tell you that, right? There's less withholdings that we're going to send to the IRS because there's no state income tax. But I would say, Jenny, there really aren't any hidden costs that you aren't thinking about. I would say they're actually pretty out there in the open for you to discover. They have to get money somewhere, right? The state has to get money somewhere. And in Texas, for an example, property taxes are typically higher than in many other states. So if you plan to move to Texas and you own a home, you may lose the value of paying no income tax because you have to pay higher property taxes. Now, of course, it depends on what state you're moving from as well, because I looked at that, and California has lower property taxes than Texas. Now, that surprised me. But the median value of the home is much higher, so the actual amount they pay in California is higher than Texas. So there's a real rabbit hole you can go down when you look at all this.
I have relatives who they met and married in Arkansas, but then they wound up moving to California, and they have joked about in retirement selling their postage stamp sized house in California and buying a mansion in Arkansas, and having money left over because the cost of the home is so different. So you're right, property taxes are a huge factor in these states that do not have income tax. Tennessee is one. My husband and I lived in Tennessee for a couple of years, and it was great to not pay state income tax, but everything else comes into play. I think maybe a comparison that people can actually visualize is think about the quality of the roads that are kept up by those states. So if you go from Arkansas to Texas, in many cases, not all throughout Texas, but in many cases, the roads are in better shape than they are here in Arkansas. What's funding that? And if they're not funding it with state income tax, they're funding it with something else that still comes from your pocket. So just be sure that you understand what the reality of it is. And I would say, we talk a lot about most people don't make the vast majority of their decisions based on logic. They base it on emotion. And this is one that I would ask you to think about other things that I think matter more than the details of your money in retirement. And that is, where's your family? Like when I got settled, we were married and settled, and here's the key, had our first kiddo. It just took a few months for my mom and dad to move from 2 hours away to about, in an emergency, 3 minutes away. Normal driving, it's about 7 minutes from our house. But they moved to be closer to us. And what has happened several times now as they aged is there's that phone call in the middle of the night of, I could call 911, but you're close. Can you come? And that ability to have them close by and for them to have us close by is literally priceless. So I would focus more on what are the things that you're going to need in retirement that maybe money can't buy, and solve your challenge, your question more in that way than in the financial aspect.
Yeah, and you mentioned the other one that I was thinking about, which is access to health care. Not your mom talking about not calling 911 because you're there, but if your family or social network's not there, do you have access and proximity to good health care facilities? I think that's a big piece that anybody who's thinking about moving in retirement needs to consider, that they may not do because they may not be there yet. Like they don't have health problems, then they're not thinking about that. And I think the other one too is climate. You think about if you're going to move to a no-income tax state, but you're going to have to be indoors more when you're older because it's cold all the time, right? I mean,
it's blazing hot.
Or it's blazing hot. Florida sounds great, right? We've got clients that live in Orlando, and they wanted to go down because they wanted to go to Disney World all the time. Hey, that's great, but we just did their review via phone earlier this month, and they talked about how blasted hot it was. That they're not going to Disney World in the summer. They're staying inside because it's getting hot in Central Florida. So I think there's a lot to consider other than, hey, I just want to find a place to move where I don't have to pay state income tax. Again, it all goes back to the holistic side of that. And this really isn't as much the financial planning, as Janet has already pointed out. It's about lifestyle planning, and that's something a good financial advisor can do with you as well. So I want to encourage you to reach out and get that plan started for you and see if the numbers make sense, but if it really is in your best interest from a lifestyle perspective. Great question, though. I like getting those questions. Our last one. We're set for our last question on the show today. It's Chris from Little Rock. I'm 60 and just sold a rental property for $310,000. I'm not sure if I should invest the proceeds, pay off our home, or use it to delay Social Security. What's the smartest move for long-term income? So you sold the property, now what? There are 3 tempting ways there to use that $300,000+, but does one maybe line up best with your retirement goals? And the first piece, we have to deal with the taxes. Are you going to have all $310,000 in proceeds to invest? You know, since this is not your primary home, you could owe some capital gains taxes on the amount of profit that you made for selling the house. The percentage tax depends on your overall taxable income for the year. From the IRS website, they write, generally the law allows an annual depreciation deduction on your rental property, and you must reduce the basis of the property by the amount of your depreciation deductions. If you don't claim some or all of the depreciation deductions allowable under the law, you must still reduce the basis of the property by the amount allowable before determining your gain on the sale of the property. That sounds confusing, right? But the point is, you know, and Janet, you and I have kind of gone into this world of rental property.
Yeah.
You do more than likely, if you're working with a CPA, you're going to depreciate some of that.
Right.
So you're going to have to claim that back on the sale. So I think you've got to go to your CPA and make sure, hey, I've got this much of the 310. And he may have already done that. Chris may have already done that. That's just covering a base for us. But if we're going to assume that he does have the advice from a CPA for guidance, and he knows how much he's got after the sale of the house to keep in cash to pay for the taxes, and he still has $310,000 to make a decision about. I think as for that cash, paying off your primary mortgage would obviously lower your debt and your expenses in retirement, and may be a good route to go, but some other things we need to ask first.
Yeah, and I'm just going to go ahead and say that usually there's not like one right answer.
Yeah.
There is use a portion of it for this and a portion of it for that. But let's kind of paint the picture of what some of that can look like. So you need to ask yourself a few questions. When are you going to retire? And frankly, Scott, I was looking kind of at the tone of this question, and Chris didn't tell us, but Chris may already be retired. We don't really know that yet. So if you're already retired, then obviously we've got to look at what is your source of income. Were you taking income from this rental property that you now need to replace? So there's several factors to come into play there as far as your retirement timeline. And then how much do you owe? So talking about the mortgage and anything else that you might owe on. You've really only mentioned the mortgage, but thinking about whether or not that's something that you need to utilize some of these proceeds for. And then when is that going to be paid off just on your current schedule? When you run an amortization schedule, is that going to be paid off in a reasonable amount of time, and therefore you could just utilize this as a retirement income source because the mortgage is already on track to be paid off?
Yeah, we don't know anything about his other investable assets here. Because, if he chooses to use these proceeds to live on and delay Social Security, it certainly would have the benefit of growing your Social Security benefit. But are you going to sit that in cash? You probably should keep some of it in cash because you don't want to put it at risk in the market if you're going to be using it. And that could cause an opportunity cost because you're going to lose purchasing power, especially if you left all $310,000 in cash. So I think about if we're going to use some or all of this to invest and create income in retirement, we need an investment strategy that's going to attack the 3 big risks that every retiree is going to face. That sequence of return risk, inflation risk, which we've already alluded to. You need some growth element in your investment strategy so that you can give yourself a raise down the line, because we do know that Social Security raises are not likely going to be enough to keep up with inflation. And then longevity risk. So we've talked about inflation. Let's hit sequence and longevity risk here as we have just a couple of minutes left.
So sequence of return risk, that's an industry jargon type of thing, but let me talk about this and make it make sense. If somebody was in, let's say we're in 2007 and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to retire next year. Well, you don't know it then, but rolling into 2008, you find out before year's end that it's a really ugly year in the market. So you retired into a down year in the market. And what happens then is your lump sum that you have, you start off with a downturn, a decrease in value of that overall lump sum. If you're doing like most retirees do and withdrawing from that overall pool of money, that's why we really encourage you to segment those assets. So even in a 2008, there may be a portion that's down, but you're not withdrawing from that portion of your assets. That money has time to go through the downturn and recover because you don't need it for a decade and a half. So we're going to leave that one alone and let it do its thing. So we negate sequence of return risk by utilizing the buckets and time segmenting when you're going to dip into those assets. We talked about inflation risk. That one people are more blind to than the market. People know that the market is going to do its thing up and down, and we talk about inflation, but we don't think about it really as far as the impact on a retirement where you're going to be pulling from these assets for 25 to 30 years. We need to be sure that you're not invested so conservatively, trying to avoid market risk, that you are inviting inflation risk and it becomes a reality for you. And then longevity risk, I'll just go ahead and make this part of my wrap up here. Longevity risk is the risk of living too long. And people don't think about that as a risk, but relative to having enough money to make that happen, it is a risk. And so if you're looking at retirement and blinding yourself to any one of these three risks, you will have a problem that you're not expecting. Scott, I had the opportunity this week to talk with a long-term client who's going through a lot of changes, and the changes have caused him to focus more on, I've got to be conservative, I've got to protect everything. And so he wanted to go ultra conservative at that point with everything and not have any growth-oriented investments. And we talked about, look, this is the reason. Remember, we talked about we don't make financial decisions emotionally, at least we shouldn't. We've got to walk through the logic. So we talked about we've got to address all of these risks, and that includes the inflation risk. We can't ignore that and just focus on market risk.
Yeah, that's a great point. I kind of piggyback on that for my final thought as well. Life is going to change as you get closer to and then into retirement. Has your investment strategy changed to prepare for that? You're going from accumulation to distribution. It is a key time to develop a plan to make sure your investment strategy is ready for your retirement and your true financial independence. If you'd like to learn more about that, we would encourage you to walk through the GenWealth Ready to Retire process. It is easy to get the ball rolling. You can call us at 866-653-PLAN. 866-653-7526, or reach out via email. Send it to show@getreadyforthefuture.com. And that's all the time we have for this week's Get Ready for the Future show. Thanks to everybody who sent in a question. And again, if you want to send one in, you can do it very easily by dialing 501-381-5228, leaving us a voicemail, or just shoot us a text to that number, and we'll see you next time.
The GenWealth financial team is available to you 24/7 at info@getreadyforthefuture.com, or call our offices at 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526. You should personally consult a financial advisor before making any investment, and no strategy can assure success. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through Independent Advisor Alliance. Independent Advisor Alliance and GenWealth Financial Advisors are separate entities from LPL Financial.